What's up, guys? So today I'm going to be going through some of my top tips and tricks to get your bike ready for the bike park. Now this is going to include everything that you need to know, things you can get away with, things you cannot get away with. I'm even going to show you a special tip at the very end that I bet you $1 you didn't know. So the first thing I always like to do is usually wash the bike, but actually we went on a ride yesterday, so we're just going to go ahead and skip to the next step because I haven't actually had a chance to wash it or even go through it. But what we're doing now, guys, is we're actually going through the entire bike and we're looking for cracks, right? Looking to make sure that the frame is still good and we're not going to have any issues anywhere along any part of the frame. Now, a couple of things to note. Where are you most likely to find cracks? Well, this is a great example right here. Okay, this is actually the weld joint that comes across. Of course, this being an aluminum frame, this is actually what they call the HAZ area, or the heat affected zone. This is the most common place you will find an aluminum crack on the bike. And you are going to want to go through this literally with a fine-tooth comb. You're going to want to go over every single piece of this bike. You're going to want to look in every single area that there could potentially be a crack and just make sure that you're not going to have some catastrophic failure. Once you've done through this process, we'll jump on to the next one. The next thing you're going to want to do is go through and do what we call nut and bolt the bike, right? We do the same thing on race cars, we do the same thing on motorcycles. You're going to want to go through every single bolt on the bike, not only just the suspension pieces, but also the brakes. In fact, you're even going to want to go in and look and check all of your cranks, even your pedals, your headset, check everything. Just throw a wrench on it, throw a multi-tool on there, go through and make sure that every single nut and bolt on there is good to go. If you do happen to find one that is loose, for instance, you put a tool on it, you go to turn it and it spins freely, or obviously just gets tighter by simply turning on it with a very little amount of pressure, you do want to remove that bolt. Remove that bolt, put some blue Loctite on it, put that bolt back in. That way you're going to make sure that you don't end up losing that bolt the next time you're out riding. Of course, this one goes without saying, but of course, guys, make sure your bike can shift. Make sure you have the ability of going through the gears. Make sure you're not going to drop a chain or any of that stuff. In fact, it's really kind of important on here, something just to kind of keep in mind. Make sure that when this lever's gone all the way down, you're all the way down to the bottom here. You can actually see some scoring marks here on this particular frame. You want to make sure that the chain's not going to drop all the way down, either all the way at the bottom or, at the top of the gears, or of course, all the way down beyond your first gear so that it doesn't bind up. That's actually a safety issue, guys. That's something you want to make sure that the chain is not going to flop off, get bound up into the tire, and then of course throw you over the handlebars. So double check that. Make sure that none of your limit switches have moved, none of your adjustments have been changed, and obviously if they have, go through the procedures. There's plenty of videos on YouTube to do that. Just make sure that you're not going to drop a chain at 20, 30 miles an hour. Speaking of chains, of course, it's always a good idea just to give a quick visual to your chain as well, just to make sure that you don't have anything weird going on, especially paying attention to, of course, your master link. Make sure that guy hasn't started to come loose, or of course you have any, major dings in it. Did one of them absorb a rock or two? Just make sure that everything looks good on the chain just by giving it a quick visual. I also like to kind of do a little bit of a twist test on these. They all should have some play in them, but if it seems excessive, maybe it's time to break out the chain stretch tool, but it's something you definitely want to look at. Another fun one to do, this is actually a pretty good one. If you just want to check the true of your rim, just throw one of these zip ties on here. I always like to take this and bend it right at about to the level. Hopefully my hand's not blocking too much there, guys. That way you know kind of a rough idea as to where to cut this guy. Go ahead and give that guy a little snip there, move her down to where you want her to be. Then this way you can actually come through here and you can actually test how true your rim is. And this is actually kind of nice. Leads us right into the next point here, which of course is going to be another safety issue, that being spoke tension. Now the next thing you want to do is go around the entire rim, right? You're essentially just feeling to see if you have any that are excessively loose or excessively tight. Like that one's actually pretty tight, so that tells me I've actually probably tweaked the rim in one direction or another. But more than anything, you want to make sure that you don't have any that are just so darn loose that it may present a safety hazard. But doing this on the front and the rear, it's just a good idea. It's a good practice to get into just to make sure that you're not going to lose a spoke. Now this next one you typically want to do on the ground, but this is actually just to check if there's any play inside of any of your bushings. And usually it's best to do this not on a stand like I'm doing here, but it's a good idea just to kind of get a feel for it, see if there's anything that's moving in there. I like to do it on the ground, perhaps even with the brake on, or have a buddy help you hold the bike. Just see if you can move anything, get any play inside of any of these, just to make sure that none of your bearings have gone to pot. Now, hopefully none of your initial settings have changed, or even your spring rate for that matter, but this does actually have a nice spherical bushing in there, so it should have obviously play back and forth. A little bit squeaky back here. In fact, you can usually actually add just a little bit of lube on here too if you do have a bike that's creaking a bit. More times than not, it's actually coming from the spring perch itself. Sometimes I like to put just a drip of Teflon or something like that in there just to keep the kind of creakiness away, because I like a nice quiet bike, but it's good to always check that as well. Now, brakes, of course, this is probably one of the most important things on the bike. Since you've already nut and bolted the entire bike, right? You've already did that in step one there. You've also probably checked this one, but it's always good to make sure that your safety clip is in here as well. Just in case this guy comes loose, this pin's not going to be able to come out. You also want to make sure that you don't have any leaks around any of the fittings. Lastly, of course, looking at your actual pads themselves. You also, it's a good idea just kind of give it a spin, make sure that you don't have any rubbing or anything like that going on, but you can actually see how thick the pads are on either side. If they start to look like they're getting small, or one side perhaps is wearing more than the other, it's probably a good idea to look at the manufacturer spec, see what the tolerance is in terms of thickness for when you want to replace them. But double check your brakes, make sure that all of this is in good working order. And of course, we're talking about cranks as well, guys. We want to make sure that the crank looks good. We want to make sure that everything freewheels nice. You don't feel any binding or anything like that going on. It's always a good idea also just to kind of grab these guys. I've got both arms over the bike here, and just see if there's any play at all inside this bearing. If there is, probably want to take it apart, see if the bearing shot or perhaps has just come loose. Again, you've already nut and bolted everything. You've made sure that all the locking rings are in place. Just see if there's anything loose in there. If something feels out of place, chances are it is. You probably need to get in there and fix it, but just a quick inspection never hurts. While we're down in this area, we might as well go ahead and check the pedals as well. Make sure that the pedals spin freely. Make sure there's no excess play in them. Make sure you don't have anything weird going on, especially when you pull on them this way. Make sure you don't have any lateral play in them. That way the bearings are still good in it. Obviously a visual inspection to make sure that there's no cracks anywhere along the arms. Of course, also along any of the hardware that attaches it. Keep in mind, these are it's a wear item, right? Pedals take a lot of abuse. They do fatigue, and in fact, if you've ever seen any of our TikTok videos, got to see one of my friends snap a pedal off because it had fatigued right here along one of the attachment surfaces, right along that little bolt head there. So kind of keep that in mind. It's also a good idea too, look along the pedals, make sure there's no cracks anywhere along it. Check your pins. Are they all still good and tight? Nothing has moved in here. Do they all feel good? Just make sure that everything's in good working order there. Here's another big bonus for you guys, and something that always catches everybody off guard. They go to the bike park, everything's fine, they've checked the bike out, they get into the gondola, they stand the bike up, and their brakes stop working. Something to test out while you're bleeding your brakes, or even before you go to the bike park. Make sure that you take the bike, stand it up on end. You don't have to have a bike stand. You can do this by just holding the rear brake, stand it up, and then cycle through this guy a few times, right? Crank through it. 9 times out of 10, if not more, I've seen people get into the gondola, get this thing stood up, and all of a sudden an air bubble travels up to the top of this and they have no rear brake. They get to the top, they set the bike down, they pump it back up, they have brakes again, but now they're concerned about their brakes, right? We always want to bike as much as we possibly can in the right state of mind. You don't want to be worried about your brakes. Do this ahead of time. Do this in your garage. Hang it from a rope off the rafters, off the garage door opener, whatever. Just have this thing vertical and make sure that your brakes are bled properly. If you are having this much trouble with this, it's a good time to do a bleed. And in fact, anytime I bleed the brakes on any of our downhill bikes, I will actually remove it from the handlebar and I will do my best to straighten that line out as much as I can. That way we're sure to get all of the air out of it, knowing full well that the bike is going to be vertical inside the gondola. So the next one is just simply the fork seals here, guys. And in fact, if you take a look at this, you can see this right here, right? I don't know if you can try to get that as best I can in there. Got a little dirt buildup right there. Usually it's a good idea to just kind of wipe this off, blow it off. But a couple of notes here. This is actually totally normal. Inside of here, of course, was going to be your little sponge that actually holds all your oil. This, of course, being your wiper seal. I always look to see, make sure that the wiper seal doesn't have any cracks. You also want to make sure that it has the retention spring on there and all that good stuff. But the oil buildup here at the front, that's actually normal. That's actually from dust. It's actually not oil. It's just a little bit of kind of saturated oil and dust that's built into it. What happens is, of course, you're going down the hill, pushes the shocks back. Shocks get depressed. They get covered in oil. They come back up. The dust sticks to it. And then, of course, the wiper seal wipes it off. That shows me that that wiper seal is doing exactly what it wants to do. Totally fine. You can get away with that. All right, since I promised this to you guys, this is the one that I bet you $1 you probably didn't know. So have you ever seen anybody that goes along and cleans these guys up, maybe right before a race, they'll put just a little bit of some kind of lube on here just to make things a little bit nicer, just to kind of make it a little bit more plush. Well, it turns out there's a lot of things that you should not use on this, one of which, of course, being WD-40. Another one is lithium grease. Typically, it's best to oil them with the same lubrication that you have inside the shock, but if you don't have that, there is an alternative solution. In fact, it's something that a lot of folks don't realize. At any time that you're dealing with rubbers and even some plastics for that matter, the best grease to use, believe it or not, is actually a silicone grease. Now, where in the world can you get this? This is the stuff you pick up at your local hardware store. They use this for lubing up O-rings and fittings, you know, things like a faucet or a tub fitting before they screw them together. It's exactly what this is. It's actually made for rubber and it's cheap. It's $5, little tiny tube, lube them up just a little bit. Of course, it traps the dirt and whatnot. You'll see your wiper seals pushing the dirt up, but for the first few hundred feet of a run, makes them nice and plush. But something I bet you didn't know, guys, always use silicone grease no matter what. Do not ever use lithium or WD-40 on your forks. That stuff actually turns rubber into goo and makes it really sticky. Nasty, nasty stuff. But there you go, guys. So the next step here, guys, is you're going to want to check to see if you have any movement inside of your headset here. Now, headsets are kind of tricky. You do want to go ahead and pull on your front brake and then give this guy just a bit of a rocking back and forth here. Be aware, you may feel some pad kickback, just the pad simply moving inside the caliper housing itself from the brake. It's not what we're after here. What you want to do is put your fingers down here, right against the triple crown, or of course right there if you can feel the frame itself, just to see if there's any movement between the two when you do this. I like to do this on the top and on the bottom. If you do have some play in there, it's a very easy fix. In fact, what you want to do is go ahead and loosen the bolt here on both sides of the triple crown as well as the one that's on the back side. Tighten down your center nut here just a little bit to see, you know, did the play go away? Make sure that you're not over tightening it to where you have any, you know, excess resistance when you go to turn it. Once you have that done, make sure you go back, tighten up all three of those bolts again, and you're right back to where you were before. These do have a tendency to get a little bit of a play in it after a while, so it is a step that I recommend testing or at least checking for every single ride. It takes 2 seconds to do it, and it's a great idea, and of course it's going to keep you safe out there on the trail. Well, so there you have it, guys. So that's essentially what I do every time I take this thing up to the bike park or just get ready for really another day up on the mountain. Going to do the same thing with the other demo here in a minute. In fact, I'll probably even end up going through the SX as well just to make sure that everything's good on it. But of course I left out some basic stuff, guys. Of course, things like shocks, tire pressure, you know, all the stuff that you're going to do anyway. But thought you guys would get a kick out of this. Thanks for watching. See you guys.